Hello! Today I want to talk about story structure, and I think we're all going to agree to collectively agree to ignore how wonky the camera is and the fact that I still can't edit videos because I still have to do them on my phone and my editing software doesn't cope with that, or my laptop doesn't, or whatever. Either way, this is unedited and you are as wonky as you are because that is as wonky as you're going to be, because such is life, and I'm not getting into it because it's boring. The point is, I want to talk about story structure. So when it comes to story structure, I have made at least one, but I think only one video about it in the past on this channel, and that was like 5 years ago. So maybe it's time for an update. But I do basically, by and large, stand by what I said way back when, which in its smushed togetherest form, definitely a word, smushed togetherest form is basically, people will tell you you have to study story structure. But the reality of the matter is that if you are anything like me, you may not actually have to study it to be able to get an understanding of it, because you might be able to gain an understanding of it purely through experience. And the experience of having read a lot of books, and the experience of having watched movies and TV shows and played video games and, interacting with stories over the years might have given you a solid understanding of story structure. So maybe you don't need to study it. And if you're really struggling with being able to understand story structure and you just can't seem to make it make sense to you in your brain, then there is the distinct possibility that you are the kind of person who understands story structure from an instinctive perspective, and as soon as you try and put quantities and quantifications onto it, it becomes very, very confusing because it's just instinct. And it's like, if you've ever I think this is a relatively common experience, it's kind of similar to that. If you've ever had to try and describe to someone how to get home from somewhere else, like to your home from somewhere else, you might realize when you're trying to give them directions, you've got no idea how you do it. Like, you have literally no idea what turnings there are. You just recognize it. It's instinct by this point. Like, that's a thing for a lot of people. They have these instinctive markers they look out for, but when you ask them what they are, they don't know because it's an instinct. They've stopped thinking about it. Or like when people who are really, really good cooks, really, really experienced cooks, and I'm not talking about chefs necessarily, but like home cooks as well, are doing a thing, they just do it. You know how like people think you don't need to be taught how to make the bed, but in reality, you don't know instinctively how to make the bed, but if you've watched someone make the bed enough times, you've probably picked up the deal, compared to someone who's never watched anyone make the bed and now has no idea what they're doing. Instinct versus learning. And I think that's exactly the same thing with story structure. Some people can just pick it up from interacting with stories, and other people really benefit from doing the digging deep research part. And you may be thinking, but Will, you've talked about using Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat before as a story structuring device. And it's like, yeah, I have. Yeah, I do use that still. But I don't write out and out romances. Like, all of my 5 books, you can see them all here, all of my 5 books, none of them is an out and out romance. They all have all but one have romantic subplots. And therefore, I'm not trying to fit my story to Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat outline, beat sheet, whatever, structure, because that's not what I'm writing. I'm not writing a romance. I'm writing a romantic subplot, and I'm basically using Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat as like a checklist after the fact. Like, I know that I've put some of these things in, but have I done all of them? And I'm struggling to make it feel like these people should be together. Maybe I should look at Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat and see if there's anything in there that she recommends that I have missed, right? And it's more like checking the manual to make sure that you're using the right setting on your washing machine when it's something that you don't use very often. You're like, oh, I've got this wool scarf that I need to wash. What setting does that go on? And you go to the manual for your washing machine, because all of the stuff that you use normally, why am I doing so many domestic appliances? All of the stuff that you use normally, you know how it works, you know what setting it is. But for stuff that's sort of rarer, you have to go looking. And it's sort of basically, that's what I use it for. I think it's a great resource for exactly that purpose. I'm sure it's also a great resource if you're using it to structure your romance, but that's not what I'm using it for, so I couldn't tell you. All of this is a very long introduction to basically saying that I had a brainwave about story structure because of this urban fantasy thing I've been writing. And if you are here thinking, Will, why did I censor the word the? Why the fuck, Will, are you writing an urban fantasy thing when you promised us another IPA? Why? And the answer is, because I am. Sorry. So I am also working on the next IPA novel. Promise. I am working on the next IPA novel. I'm working on a bunch of different stuff. It just happens to be that during this pirate year, I gave myself completely free rein to work on whatever I wanted. And the thing that came to mind was this urban fantasy series. And the thing with this urban fantasy series that's relevant to this conversation is that it is a full follow-on series, and I'm attacking it? No, that's not the word I want to use. I'm attempting it in a very different way than I did with any previous series. So, quick rundown of how I've written series in the past. With the Guardian Cadet series, I started with book 1, I completely finished it, I published it, I started on book 2. With Unlicensed Delivery, I wrote book 1, and then I started on like 5 subsequent books, and then I downsized that to less of those, and now I'm working on 2 of them concurrently. With the Not That Kind of Dandy series, the pirate ones, I wrote the second one first, couldn't figure out what the ending was, decided to write the character's backstory of how they became a pirate, realised it would be a good book, realised how those 2 things ended up being completely parallel to each other, smushed them together, wrangled the endings of both because they have to match, because they're a pair, and that's how I wrote that. But with this urban fantasy thing, what I'm doing is I'm writing every single book in one long swoop, as if it's all one book. Because the thing is, with the Guardian Cadet series, the premise of the series is Mary wants to be a guardian, right? That's the whole Guardian Cadet series. That's the whole basic overarching premise of all of the books. And everything that happens in each of the individual books ties into that, but it is kind of a solo plot. Like if you came to Mary Ellen Finding the Air and you read that first, and then you went back and read Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, it'd be weird. I don't recommend it, but it would definitely work, right? You could definitely do that without really losing too much because of it, because it's not a super duper close follow-on. There's a couple of months between books while everybody heals up and deals with the aftermath of the first book, or like the immediate aftermath. And then we go into the plot of the second book, which is strongly tied to the first book, but it's not so intrinsically linked that you couldn't follow it otherwise. With the IPA series, we are likely to be moving ships a lot. So if we're moving ships a lot, then that means that we're, there's no real, there is some follow-on, it's complicated, and you will understand it when there are more books out. But for now, just trust me. And then with the Not That Kind of Dandy series, those 2 are parallel to each other. They're basically I would consider them to be like the overarching story of Not That Kind of Dandy is, this is a thing that happened to Nat, where their universe got turned upside down, right? And then the second book is their universe getting turned upside down. So they've made themselves comfortable in a new universe, this whole new life they've set up for themselves after the upside down of book 1. Everything's settled down, everything seems calm. And then, whoop, hey, we've turned it over again. And they are fully parallel to one another. It's very craftily put together, I have to admit. I do think it's very well put together. And that really relies on structure, but that wasn't one of those things where I really struggled to make it match, because I'd already fully written one of these pieces, and then the second one just slotted into place so easily. And by that I mean the first book slotted into the places to match up with the second book just so neatly. It was glorious to write. But when it comes to this urban fantasy thing, the overarching plot is the thing that takes the main character into the story in the first place. Am I gonna have to talk about what this is actually about? Yeah, fuck it, we're gonna do that. So the overarching plot of these urban fantasy books, Claret Chronicles, in case you're wondering, I have got a couple of short stories out about it already, but the Claret Chronicles, the thing that takes Billy, our main character, to Claretbury, the place, thus the title. But the thing that takes Billy to Claretbury is the plot that will thread through completely intrinsically the entire series. There is no like, aha, this fits into that. It's not like the Guardian Cadet series where this fits into the larger thing of this and this fits into the larger, and you can see that like ties between them, but they are two separate pieces. With this, every single major plot point feeds into this overarching plot line. It's like a TV series arc, right, with episodes in it. Whereas with the Guardian Cadet series, it feels more like movies, or like each book is in itself a TV series, like season in an overarching series. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Whereas like with the IPA series, it's a lot more like Star Trek, where you get like, you've got Star Trek Lower Decks and you're always with the Star Trek Lower Decks cast, but also there's that episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds where the Lower Decks cast comes into it and there's that crossover. That's what the IPA series is much more like. Whereas with, again, this urban fantasy thing, it is literally the whole arc of the whole series is what impacts every single individual book's plot. Every single one is this overarching plot. Which is why it feels like writing it like one big story is going to be better and easier. And so far, I'm right. Because I am into book 2/3 of this thing. Like I have the whole first book. And in another world, I might have published that if I wasn't in my pirate break year. So pirate break meaning I get to take essentially a break from having to write to publish, because I have my whole year planned out with pirate novels, so I don't need anything new until 2025. And like I have a very specific timeline for how I'm going to wrangle this currently. I hope I can stick to it. But basically, because I have this full year before I need to really think about what is coming next, I was like, okay, this is the best time to get this sorted, because I want to be able to write a full, like approximately 5 books in one go. And there's no way to do that without having a lot of buffer time built in. Buffer pirates. All of this, as there's a lot of ways to get to, I realised that in order to make these books work, they didn't need to match up in the way that a lot of my previous books have, like my previous book series have. So like when you look at Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse and Mary Ellen Finding the Air, structurally speaking, they are very compatible. A lot of their like major plot beat moments match up, and that's how story structure works. But it's true, a lot of their plot beats really match up with one another, because that's just how it went, and it's kind of the best because of that. But same with Not That Kind of Dandy. With Not That Kind of Dandy, almost everything is so interconnected and interwoven. It is. I've already said it, but I think it's the best structure I've ever built into a series. And I realised that these these Claretbury Chronicles, the urban fantasy novels, they don't need to be that structured, right? What they need is these specific high points to hit every single time. And you may be thinking, well, that's just structure. And maybe it is. I was going to say you're wrong, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm just trying to figure this stuff out. But I realised what I've started calling them is my pillars, right? Because I like columns, because I'm a big ancient Greece nerd. So my pillars, my columns, my, things that bear the weight of the story. And I have now made myself a little A4 folded in half sheet. So it's got 4 sides. So for Act 1, Act 2, Part 1, Act 2, Part 2, and Act 3. Because that is a highly recommended piece of story structure, is to have it broken down into what is actually really 4 acts. But inside the 3-act structure. Do you see what I mean about story structure being made up nonsense? But fuck it. We're working with what we got. And what we got is that is one of the most highly recommended pieces of story structure. So I went with it. Split it up into 4 acts. I do like a midpoint I'll admit, I do enjoy a midpoint, as proven, again, by the Guardian Cadet series. That has really, like, precise midpoints, I think. Like, in Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, the Guardian graduation ball is the midpoint. And, like, all of the little bits surrounding it on each side. So, like, the 3 chapters of the Guardian graduation ball, so final tests, the graduation ball itself, and the next chapter after that, those are all so quintessentially the midpoint in pretty much every single structuring method that has a midpoint mentioned. So, like, I did a good job. Tell me I'm great. No. But when I figured out was that I love a midpoint. So having a midpoint built in is very appealing to me. So when I was building my pillars, what I actually did was I went through what was now a almost fully completed first book in this series. Asterisk. That was a terrible asterisk. Asterisk. Almost fully completed, meaning I have written the full story. There are lots of scenes that are missing, and I've already been back twice to put in foreshadowing for book 2 and 3 as I'm working on those, and inevitably I will be doing the same for books 4 and 5. If there are 4 and 5, if that is as many. I think there's gonna be 5. I'm pretty sure there's gonna be 5, but we will see how it actually pans out. I do not have more than 5 titles, but we will get there when we get there. So what I figured out for my pillars is honestly a lot like Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat outline story structure thing. She also breaks it up into 4 acts, by the way. Because in Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat, you have introduce H1, Heart 1, and introduce Heart 2 and their meet cute, right? In this case, because it's not a romance I'm trying to do, we have introduce the main players, which is still a standard piece of the story structure in general. Introducing your main players in Act 1 is normal, very standard. In this case, the main players that I want to make sure are introduced in Act 1 no matter what else are Billy, the main character, from whose perspective we see the novel, although it is third person like Nat, and this guy and this girl. I do not want to tell you anything because nothing is set in stone except these 3 people are definitely in it, and I don't want to give spoilers yet because I want to be able to like announce them when I'm good and ready. So we're just going to call them this guy and this girl. Billy, this guy and this girl. And their 3 locations are also things that need to be introduced as pillars. So Billy's home, this guy's main location, and this girl's main location, right? All of their like home bases, as it were. We also need to introduce the book plot, which is the overarching plot and how it feeds into this one specific book. And also we need to make sure that Billy gets a letter. That one is more surprising, but actually it turns out because the first book starts with Billy getting a letter, and if you've read the Guardian Cadet series you know where this is going. Because the first book starts with Billy getting a letter, the second book also starts with Billy getting a letter, and the third book also starts with Billy getting a letter, and now we're into 3 books of it happening. 4 and 5 must also begin this way, right? That's got to happen. So in that case, that becomes a pillar. And these letters, to be fair, are important because they help establish that, again, in the story structure, general guidelines, you have like, what does daily life look like for your protagonist? I don't know why I had to wiggle so much for that, but what does daily life look like for your protagonist? That as a concept, that's what these letters really can introduce, but they're also great for like introducing the main plot or introducing these other important characters. Like in book 3 we get introduced to a brand new character right in Act 1, super important character in book 3 onwards, and and that's in that first scene because this new character is very, very important and is disrupting the balance that we have come to, because guess what, book 3 is in fact, say it with me, the midpoint. If it's a 5-book series, what's right in the middle there? Book 3. So that is where things have to change. That is where things have to shift. That has to be my Guardian graduation ball of it all, I guess. So then we move into Act 2, Part 1. So the build up to the midpoint, if you will. In that, I have introduced subplot 1. Subplot 1 not to give too much away, but usually has something really intrinsically tied to the main plot. It is, I'm going to keep using the Guardian Cadet series because it's another fantasy series, but also because it's a really clear structure and I know exactly what everything that happens in it. But in, the subplot 1 in these Cleric Chronicles novels are a lot like how the plots of the Guardian Cadet series novels fit into the overarching larger plot of Mary Wants to Be a Guardian. That's how subplot 1 works in Cleric Chronicles. We also have to have a different kind of interaction, essentially this letter that happens has to happen in a different format. Sounds nonsensy, but I know what I mean. Then we get the introduction of subplot 2, and I'm saying then these things can happen in any order. These things just have to happen. They don't have to happen in this order. So we get the subplot 2 introduced. Subplot 2 will not be resolved until the second half of the novel, but subplot 1 conclusion is the midpoint. We also have to have a scene wherein Billy is capable at their job, so that it's really clear that they are good at this, and the reason they're struggling so hard is because this is hard. I don't know if you've ever seen Leverage. I've been watching it recently, but Leverage, you have a lot of moments where Elliot, as one of the main characters, as one of the core 5, Elliot is the hitter. He is strong and he fights people. That's what he does. That's what he's good at. And anytime he's put into a situation where that's not what's needed of him, he struggles real hard. But also, it's more poignant when he does struggle in a fight because he's against an opponent who is just as skilled or just as strong as he is, because we have seen him be so capable for so much of it. This is kind of almost the reverse of that. Not in that it's trying to make Billy look less capable, but because we are seeing these pockets of time where Billy is just incredibly capable, incredibly skilled at what they do, you start to believe as a reader that Billy is actually capable of doing things, and that the reason that they're struggling with subplot 1, subplot 2, and the main plot of the books is because those things are particularly difficult. This is another thing that pops up really strongly in the third book, in the midpoint book, because there's this new character introduced who is not halfway as capable as Billy at any of this. And that is a key downfall kind of moment. But yeah, and then of course, as I said, we close subplot 1, and that is the end of Act 1. The close of subplot 1 and the transition into the close of subplot 1, the transition into Act 2. So the beginning of Act 2, transition into Act 2, Part 2. So Act 2, Part 2 has pillars also, which are, the first one, I'm not sure what it is yet. There's this, I think in a traditional structure it would be called reaction 2. So it's reaction to the closing of subplot 1. And so far in my notes, it's possibly 3 things. So we're just going to skim over that one. We also have another shift where instead of it being that Billy is being contacted by the people who send the letters, Billy is the one doing the contacting. Then we have, in my notes, it says, just a little breakdown, which is dealing with the emotional impact of the situation that they are in. Then we have another moment where Billy is capable, because again, we've got to really clarify to the reader that the reason that they are struggling is not because they are incapable. They are very capable. They're very good at what they do. They're just struggling because this is particularly difficult. Then we close subplot 2 to move into Act 3. Now, Act 3 so far is very, very thin on the ground, because that is the act that I struggle the most with. And I know that that will flesh out once I get to book 5. I have to get all the way to book 5 and know exactly what's going to happen there, and then I can go back and properly flesh out the endings of all of the previous books. But I can't write book 5 first because I don't know how we're going to get there. So what we're doing in Act 3 Pillars so far is that we're closing the book's plot and we are advancing the series plot. That's all that I've got. Now, these pillars are not me saying, this is how you should go forth, fellow author, if you are one, and organize your story structure. Absolutely not. What I'm trying to communicate with all of this, other than, hey, here's some fun stuff, aren't you excited about my own fantasy series, is the thing that I'm trying to actually communicate is that I think that when it comes to story structure, especially if you are the kind of person who does well through story osmosis, is what I'm still going to call it because I like calling it osmosis. But if you're the kind of person who benefits from, who deals with it through story osmosis rather than studying story structure, making your own pillars to continue a series and to maintain continuity in the series that you're trying to write, making your own pillars for what you definitely want to happen in each of those acts can be really beneficial. Like, I was really struggling with book 2 until I went through and I wrote out these pillars that happened in book 1, and then I went through and I found how, like, I ticked off how many of them happen in book 2 so far, and so far we've got literally everything from the Act 1 pillars is already there, and 50% of the Act 2 pillars are there. And then I got distracted and started writing book 3. So, because like I said, I'm doing things very chaotically because I have to get to the end of the series before I can get to the end of the first book. Sounds like it makes no sense, but I promise it does make sense. And yeah, so if you've managed to get through the full 26 and a half minutes of this so far, and you're thinking, Will, I came here for advice. If you, by the way, are brand new and you don't know who Will is, that's me. I'm Will. But anyway, if you're thinking, Will, I came here for advice, you haven't given me any, my advice heretofore is for you. Story structure is complicated. It can be really difficult. Try with a book that you like but don't like too much. Like, don't want to have ruined by trying to do this. Try with a book that you like and you can read 1,000 times and you know really well, but not one that you love so much that if you do this, it's going to wreck it. To plot it out into different story structures. Like I did it with Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse. I went through with a bunch of different sticky notes for different story structure styles, and I tried picking out all of these different bits. Couldn't do it. And I was like, oh no, is the structure on this really that bad? And then I asked my wife and she's like, no, you just can't do story structure. Like, you knew that, didn't you? And I was like, well, yeah, I knew that, but I thought I'd be able to do it for this for some reason. She was like, no, that's not how you work. It's like grammar. It just doesn't make sense. And again, I do think that it's probably the dyslexia, but maybe it's not. I don't actually know. The grammar thing is definitely the dyslexia. But anyway, try doing the story structure thing. Try fitting stuff to story structure. And if you can't make it work, just assume that you're an osmosis person and try writing without needing to look at story structure. See if there's any story structures that kind of at least vaguely resonate with you. And then see if there's any story structures that vaguely resonate with you. And then lean on that one or those ones, however many of them there are, when you are feeling like something is missing. Just go through, and you don't have to firmly affix different bits to different bits of it. Like, I'm not saying by yourself, Save the Cat writes a novel or whatever and affix your story into those Save the Cat beats. You don't have to do that at all. But what you can do is you can go through and be there like, I feel like I've got this, I feel like I've got that, I feel like I've got this, I feel like I've got that, I feel like maybe this is the thing that's missing, and then fill that thing in, right? Or go looking to see if that is in fact the thing that's missing. Basically what I'm saying is try and do what I do with Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Bee, which is where I will go through my romances. I'll go through the list that she's got in the book of each of the beats that she thinks you should hit in Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm just going to call it Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll go through each of those and I'll be there like, yes, this has happened. I have introduced the love interest. They have met. They have immediately felt that pull towards one another, or they specifically haven't, depending on what I'm doing exactly. they have then subsequently gone and done this bit and that bit. And actually, you're right, Gwen Hayes, I've not put in the seeds of doubt. They just start being really, really doubty and breaking up for no given reason within the narrative. And hey, guess what? That feels unrealistic, right? That doesn't feel good as a reader to see, because you don't really understand why it's happening. And aha, problem solved. This is what was missing. And like, I don't have to make sure that I match up with everything else. It's just sort of by the vibe of it. Have I done this? Yeah. And it's like, if it's probably, then I count that as a strong yes. By the way, strong yes for any sort of like, I think so. Because for me, at least, when I come across the thing that I haven't included, I'm like, rats, that's the bugger. Sometimes in that exact tone and those exact words. Sometimes not so much. And yeah, so when it comes to story structure, there are loads of different ways to do it, and I don't honestly think there is a way to do it wrong. And if you want to hold fast to my previous advice that I gave when I was still writing Marielle and Breaking the Curse of fuck story structure, who needs it, because you don't understand how it works, but your stories somehow come out nicely structured anyway, I will point you towards Marielle and Breaking the Curse, which is just as, like, I never went through and tried to, well, I did go through and try to fit it to story structure, but I never, while I was writing it, went through and tried to fit it to story structure, because I just knew it wasn't going to happen. So I didn't try. And then I ended up with a really well-structured novel. So, and like, I'll say this as well. I'm still learning as an author, and that was my very first book. There are pieces of it that I look at now and I think, ooh, I would change that. If that was a draft that I was still working on, I'd probably make a little bit of alteration here and there. Like, I'd probably change the beginning a fair bit, because I think we spend a lot of time with Mary before the story really starts. But at the same time, I don't think that's necessarily bad. I just think it doesn't necessarily fit with the way that I write books now, or the way that people want to read books now necessarily. But then again, people really like it, and I really like it. Like, every time I read it, I'm like, I love this story. Oh, look at this happening. Look at that happening. And then, like, once I'm done with that, I'm like, maybe I should have made that beginning slightly quicker. But then it's also like, but what would I have taken out? So I don't know. Like, there are pieces of it where I'm like, I feel like I would be able to do that more effectively now. But I also don't want to change any of the big dramatic factors about it. Like, I wouldn't want to do too much to it, because I think it's a really good book. I just also think that it's not my strongest book because it's my first one. And like, if you've read all of my books, then hi, hello, I love you. If you've read all of my books and you like Marielle and Breaking the Curse best out of all of them, then great. I love that. I love that you love it. And I'm sure there are loads of brilliant things that I can't even see about it, because I am a person who brings my own baggage to these, just like everyone else is. So I still think it's a really well-structured book, is what I'm saying. Like, I think that it is, of all things, it is my most weakly structured book. My best structured book, in case you're interested, is actually Unlicensed Delivery. That's the one with the best, most optimized structure. But, like, I don't think any of them are unstructured. The one that I had the hardest time with was Welcome to Humanity, because it's got 3 interweaving timelines, and the structure on that is a literal nightmare. But it still works. I still did it. It all fits together really nicely. Those timelines intersect in a really lovely way. So I did a good job. And I'm sure that you, if you are writing books, and that is why you are here, will also do a good job. Like, if you can't wrangle story structure yourself, store-bought is fine. Getting someone else to do it is all good. Like, there is no harm or shame in outsourcing these things. And I think that is always, always my biggest piece of advice to new writers is is you don't have to do it all yourself. Like there's this idea that authors are like isolated and it's such a lonely job. No, there's no one to talk to, there's no one to work through these. It's just you on your own by yourself making magic with words. It's like, I don't name half of the people that help in the acknowledgements of my book, because some of those people are cats and dogs and teddy bears. So that's kind of weird. I don't want to say thank you, Bertie Bear, in my acknowledgements of Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, because I was confused at one point about what to do with a hand on her face, and I needed something that's face was the size of a human face. So I found my wife's teddy bear that she's had since she was a baby, and I held its face and I put his, sorry Bertie, held his face and put his paw up against my face, and it's like, I'm not going to put that in the acknowledgements. I mean, I've just announced that I did it on YouTube, but I'm not going to put it in the acknowledgements of a book, because it does really require the full story. And it's like, I do the stupid reels on Instagram where I ask Porthos what he would do in this situation, what he thinks I should make my characters do. And it's like, sometimes I take the dog's advice. But in reality, the vast majority of how writing is not actually as solo as people make it out to be is that I lean on my wife real hard. I'm there like, I don't know what should happen next. And she's like, have you considered this? And I'm like, I had not, I will now. Or like, I'll rubber duck her. So rubber ducking, if you don't know, this feels long-winded, but rubber ducking, if you don't know, is where you take an inanimate object, usually a rubber duck, and you talk at it until you find a solution for your own problem. And by rubber ducking a person, you are turning them into that inanimate object that you talk to. So you're talking through your problem and they're sitting there going, right, I see what you mean. And then at the end of the conversation, you figure out your own problem and all they've had to do is make like sympathetic noises. But the thing is it works really well. And then sometimes when it doesn't work, you can actually ask them for their input. So yeah. Writing is another solo activity, and getting someone else to check your story structure after the fact is pretty great, actually. So I hope this is entertaining and or helpful. If you are excited about the prospect of my urban fantasy thing, please do let me know, because I am excited and I really want to get it done. I am working on the IPA books, I promise. And I'm working on a bunch of other stuff too. In the meantime, you can pick up my pirate novels. I don't actually know when this video is coming out, and I don't actually know, therefore, whether both of them are out or one of them is out and one of them is available for pre-order. But either way, you can get your hands on Not the Fighting Kind right now, which is the first one, where Nat's world gets turned upside down by the fact that they get captured and put on a pirate ship. And then the second book will be either coming soon or be out now, Not the Fainting Kind. And it is where Nat's life gets turned upside down again. But if I tell you anything about it, that would be spoilers for the first book, so I'm not going to. Or you can check out my other books. Welcome to Humanity is a standalone sci-fi dystopia. The Guardian Cadet series is a full fantasy, like sword and sorcery style thing. And Unlicensed Delivery is a sci-fi space romp where you are just traversing the universe trying to get your deep space travel license, which is kind of like a driving license, but more like an international driving license. I don't know. It's getting a license for outer galactic travel. Intergalactic travel? What am I trying to say? Intergalactic travel. So you can travel from one galaxy to another. Deep space. That pitch was a bit rusty. But it's fine. And of course, as always, this YouTube channel is not monetized. And if you would like to support me, there is always a link to my Ko-fi account in the description box below, along with all the other links that you could possibly need, primarily my website. That's the place to go if you want any information about what's out, what's available, what's not available, and where to read my short stories completely free, because they come out almost every single week. I'll see you soon. Bye!